Manley Hall, The Wisdom of the Knowing Ones. Chapter 1, Gnosticism, the Key to Esoteric Christianity. In the first century of the Christian era, the intellectual world was extending its inquiries along the lines set down by the teachings of Plato and Aristotle. Plato had set up the doctrine of causes. His philosophy was devoted to those larger and general truths which may be defined collectively as universals. Through him, the conception of an organized universe was introduced to Mediterranean civilization. This organization originated in archetypes, that is, grand patterns in causes. These patterns, formed by the terms and elements of a divine geometry, enclosed material life within a network of cosmic energies. Aristotle, reacting dramatically to the Platonic challenge, was endowed by nature with an organization of faculties which resented the domination of intangibles. He did not deny the Platonic scheme of things, and held that Plato's vision was unassailable, not necessarily because it was true, but because the elements involved were beyond the attack of intellectual criticism. Aristotle loved to argue, but argument about intangibles could not be conclusive. He could not win his argument on Plato's grounds. Seeking a more substantial footing, Aristotle emphasized the significance of tangibles. Here was a sphere of obvious facts. There was room for argument in matters of implication, but the facts themselves were incontrovertible. Thus he found security in the contemplation of the knowable. He set up an organization in nature by reducing the facts and their reasonable extensions into categories. He challenged Plato to come down to earth and meet him on the level of things known. There is no indication that Plato accepted the challenge. Although the men were in close association, there never was a complete meeting of the minds. And as a consequence, subsequent generations inherited a legacy of unfinished business. Universals were defined, particulars were organized and classified, but the interval between universals and particulars became a more and more important consideration. It was this interval between invisible causes and visible effects that burdened the intellectual world during the 1st century AD. The human mind engaged in the systematic process of building bridges to link cause to effect and effect to cause. The two extremes were in themselves irreconcilable, at least mentally, but in nature itself they were reconciled. There must be an explanation to fit the facts. This was the broad challenge in the world of thought, and it resulted in the creation of a school of intellectuals who became the leaders of a revolutionary discovery in the sphere of mind. This discovery produced Gnosticism, and the group supporting the new solution to the pressing dilemma was known as the Gnostics. Gnosticism is defined as emanationism, or a philosophy of emanations. If two qualities cannot meet in substance, they can be brought together only by extension. Universals cannot become particulars, and particulars cannot become universals. But universals exist according to degrees, and particulars exist according to conditions. For example, the ancients recognized 4 elements ascending from the most solid, which was earth, to the most dense, which was air. The ascending order of the elements caused the highest to be the least material. That which is least material is most like that which is spiritual. Thus, matter exists in an ascending scale of conditions, qualifications, modifications, and rarefactions of itself. Spirit, which is the common substance of universals, likewise exists according to states. Spirit per se, that is, in its own nature, is unknowable, but from spirit proceed things spiritual according to a descending order. Intellect is an intangible pertaining to the order of spirit, yet to a degree it has formal dimension and proportion and is subject to definition. Energy, or force, as it was known in old times, is likewise an extension of spirit. But this extension is subject to greater limitations than intellect because it is definable. All definitions define natures according to their limitations. Axiomatically, definition is limitation. A descending order of spiritual qualities, less spiritual as they depart from their own substance and cause, is therefore acceptable by the mind. Conversely, an ascending order of things material, less material as they depart from their substance and source matter, is also appreciable to the reason. What could be more reasonable, therefore, than to assume that the two opposites can meet on a common ground? Of course, emanationism assumes the existence of two co-eternal realities, one spiritual and the other material. This Aristotle would allow, for he regarded matter as immortal, without beginning or end. He also accepted the eternity of spirit. The existence of two eternal principles endeared Aristotle to the Churchmen because they found in his doctrine the comfort they sought for their own belief in the eternity of good and evil and the endless warfare between God and the devil. A number of modern scientists are also inclined to favor Aristotle's philosophical anthropomorphism. Whether or not spirit exists belongs to the sphere of uncertainties, but the eternity of matter is a comforting thought for those seeking something permanent in an impermanent universe. Interesting speculation can result from such questions as, is spirit the highest degree of matter? Or is matter the lowest degree of spirit? This brings complications, however. Are spirit and matter qualities of one essence differing only in degree? Or are they two utterly irreconcilable opposites for which no common denominator exists? If the two extremes are equally inevitable and indestructible, which is the superior? Has either any need for the other? Is the action of spirit upon matter a kind of cosmic incident or accident? And can matter modify spirit? The scholastics struggled with these issues for centuries, and the results, though stimulating to the intellectual faculties, were far from solutional to any practical problem. Plato held that matter was an extension of spirit, that part of universal being most remote from the spiritual quality. He used the analogy of light and darkness. Light is a principle, but darkness is not a principle. It is merely the absence of light. The Aristotelians, not to be outdone, suggested the possibility that darkness could be a principle, and that light could equally well be regarded as the absence of darkness. Light was incidental. Darkness was inevitable. Light could temporarily dispel darkness, but all light must ultimately fail, and in the failure of light, the eternity of darkness was revealed. The vital element of precedence was also involved. Did light precede darkness, or did darkness precede light? That which precedes must inevitably include that which succeeds it. Did darkness contain the potential of light, or did light contain the potential of darkness? Most systems infer that darkness preceded light and is therefore more ancient, more universal, and more real. Suns are foci of light set up in darkness, but in quantity, darkness always exceeds light because light is always surrounded by an immeasurable area composed of the absence of light. Is absence then greater than presence? Presence always exists in a field consisting of the absence of itself. One condition is not definable without the other. They are co-eternal and co-dependent, with absence always in excess of presence. It is like the problem of food and appetite. Hunger is the absence of food. Food is the solution of hunger. Food is real and definable. Hunger has no dimension or appearance. Which, then, is the reality? Food will remove hunger, but only for the time being. No matter how much food there may be, hunger remains. And it is necessary to miss only a few meals to reveal its eternal presence. If light is food and darkness is hunger, which is the more real? Food is a temporary solution to an eternal problem. All this is very confusing. If darkness is equivalent to space, then light may be equivalent to time. This again presents a variety of complications. Can time exist without its space equivalent, eternity? Is eternity the emptiness of time or the fullness of time? Is it all or nothing? If it is all time, then eternity or space is superior to time. If eternity is the privation of time, then time is the reality and eternity is merely an illusion of the mind. There is an illusion here somewhere, but which of these abstractions is the stronger depends upon which school you belong to. The early Christian concept of God further complicated the already confused picture. Most pagan systems of religious philosophy conceived of the supreme spiritual power as identical with the substance and nature of space. Thus, the space dimension was regarded as a complete fullness. To our physical perception, space is emptiness, properly described as nothing. To the pagans, this nothing was simply no thing. It was not emptiness, but the abstraction of forms. It was universal life unconditioned, unmanifested, undifferentiated, and in its own essential state, undefinable. The early Christian church regarded deity as outside of the plan of creation. God was a person, separate from the world which he had formed. This divinity ruled the universe from some extra-universal throne. God exercised despotism over matter, molding it into a variety of forms. Each of these forms was ensouled by a separate life principle, which descended to it from the nature of deity. Thus, to the pagans, God was a power emerging through the processes of spiritual and material generations. But to the Christians, he was a separate and alien force, controlling the creational process by an absolute tyranny of the divine will. The Gnostics belonged among the pagan groups inasmuch as they believed the universe to be the body of God through which the spiritual power manifested as a constant impulse towards unfoldment and growth. At the same time, the Gnostics attempted an explanation of Christian mystical philosophy according to a basically pagan tradition. In this way, the Gnostic cult succeeded in offending both the pagans and the Christians. Each felt that its viewpoint was compromised. Gnosticism was the great heresy of the ante-Nicene period of church history. The fathers of primitive Christianity, having elected themselves the sole custodians of salvation, exercised this prerogative to stamp out all traces of Christianity as a philosophical code. They particularly resented the Gnostics because these essentially pagan thinkers insisted upon pointing out the non-Christian sources and elements which had contributed to the rise of the Christian sect. The early bishops, saints, and martyrs such as Irenaeus, Hippolytus, Epiphanius, Tertullian, and Theodoret divided their activities between the somewhat diversified tasks of preaching brotherly love and a gospel of charity and piety on the one hand, while on the other hand formulating vicious and slanderous attacks upon the members of all dissenting creeds. No pious ante-Nicene father had proved his zeal and incidentally his bigotry until he had prepared an elaborate treatise against heresies and pitched a sanctified pebble at some heresiarch. All good churchmen sought to demonstrate that pagans in general and Gnostics in particular were promulgators of hateful and misleading doctrines. It was intimated and in some cases actually affirmed that a perverse spirit, the faithful old devil, had raised up teachers of false doctrines in an effort to compromise the infallible revelations of the apostles and their legitimate descendants. Thus, the learned fathers, who incidentally seemed better informed on heresies than orthodoxies, refuted all of the doctrines of the heretics with one grand gesture. It may be seen, therefore, that the Gnostics occupied an extremely precarious position. They were reconcilers of extreme differences, and the way of the peacemaker is usually quite as hard as that of the transgressor. Gnosticism was despised by the Church because it sought to interpret Christian mysticism in terms of the metaphysical systems of the Greeks, Egyptians, and Chaldeans. At the same time, it was openly opposed by contemporary pagan philosophers, particularly certain Neoplatonists, because it appeared to accept, at least in part, the unphilosophic and illogical tenets forced upon an unsuspecting world by the Christian enthusiasts. Attacked from both sides and gradually crushed by the sheer weight of numbers, Gnosticism finally passed into limbo after a desperate struggle for existence over a period of several centuries. Strange to relate, Gnosticism is indebted to its enemies for the survival of certain of its teachings. Until comparatively recently, all the information available on the subject is preserved in the writings of those excited and irritable ante-Nicene fathers, who went into elaborate details concerning the substance of the heresies they condemned. Although the Gnostics have vanished from the earth, the analogies which they established between Christian and pagan doctrines have proved invaluable to students of comparative religion.